today I think we can go into the image of the Ankh, the key of life. I think it's the most familiar amulet of the ancient Egyptians, and the Ankh is usually depicted as being in the possession of the gods and royalty, the king and the queen. That's basically where you see the Ankh. There's an image of the horizon, which is a straight line, and a circle in the middle, which is the sun. So the sun on the horizon. And in that you can see the idea of the Ankh. So you have, in effect, a four-armed cross with the upper vertical arm in the form of a circle. And in the ancient world, a cross would depict the four cardinal points. And if you look at the image of the step pyramid, for example, the earth is below the ground and the sky is above the ground. So you have the sky goddess Nut, the triangle being her womb, or the Isle of Fire, which is actually in Draco, because she's a sky goddess, and her navel depicts Draco, the omphalos, which means the centre of the heavens. And below the ground is the cube, or the square, depicting her mate, Geb. And the step pyramid itself would be the earthly omphalos, which is in line with Draco. So the two omphalos, as above so below, they're actually in line. So you have that kind of idea of a vertical axis running right down through the sun, through the planets, and right down to the south, really right into the pit. So in the step pyramid you would have a shaft going from the horizon down to the south, near the mummy chamber, which is where the black sun would be. So you have the golden sun above, which would be the Ankh on the horizon, and below you would have the three arms of the cross. So the horizontal arm would be the actual surface of the earth, as it were. And inside the womb of Nut is the sun seed that then becomes a sun and rises out of the truncated top. You could say the opening of the womb. And that circle rests on the truncated top and above the 6 steps in the form of Horus or Ra. So in effect you could see the step pyramid as embodying the Ankh, the key of life. But of course, when the sun comes out of the underworld, or the star within the circle, or the sunseed within the golden egg of the phoenix, when it comes out, as it were, in the east, then in a sense you're free of those conditions. So you could see the sun resting on the horizon, on the Ankh, as the positive, and the black sun beneath it as the negative. We also said that the step pyramid itself is in the figure of Osiris, or an Osiris. When you're an initiate, you become an Osiris, because Horus represents the initiate of Thoth. So you become the figure of the actual step pyramid, which I believe is a memorial made by Imhotep, the architect, to celebrate his own initiation and deification as Thoth. Although he dedicated it to his father, he also put his own titles on the base of a statue of his father, which is very unusual. The Egyptologists say that's a very unusual thing to do, is to put your own titles. And one of his titles was the greatest of seers, and that is the title of the high priest of Heliopolis, because Imhotep was the high priest of Saqqara, where he built the step pyramid, and that was the star cult. And then he moves over to Heliopolis, becomes the high priest there of the sun cult, and he moves Osiris, who's the head of the Ennead, or the head of the star cult, and he becomes head of the Ennead in Heliopolis. And at that time, Osiris was just coming into being. He was replacing Atum, the old chief god of Heliopolis, and the head of the Ennead. So Imhotep's time, he was instrumental in bringing about the cult of Osiris. And of course his step pyramid being aligned to Draco, which is the seat of the eternal king, Osiris. And of course if it's dedicated to his father, then his father would be expected to go to Draco. And so you see him seated on a chair inside a hermetically sealed stone cube. And in the tarot pack, that would be the chariot. So we're seeing the chariot of fire, as it were. And he'll ascend step by step through the planetary houses to the apex of the pyramid, where in a sense the chariot would represent the sunbow or a starship. So it would be a starship of Draco, it could be a starship of Orion, because that's another seat, the royal seat of Osiris, or it could be Sirius, where you've got Sirius A, which would be Isis, and Sirius B, which would be Horus. That's my estimation, because in Robert Temple's Sirius mystery, he talks about the Dogons, who were originally from Egypt, were in the Sahara, and I think it was the late 19th century, early 20th century, some anthropologists possibly discovered that the Dogons said that there was Sirius A and Sirius B, which wasn't known to the modern astronomers, and it actually proved to be so. So I'm saying that in the Egyptian model, Sirius A would probably be Isis, and Sirius B would be Horus, because it says the soul of Sirius is Horus. Now when the sun hero, Horus, descends in the west, he could represent the sun descending in the west, which becomes the black sun. Now if you take the Ankh and you invert it, then I see that as the key that opens the door in the west and closes the door in the west. So the key is inserted into the door and opens the door and then closes the door. Around the underworld, or the tomb, as it were, below the ground, which is a black cube, there's a black wall, which I think represents not only the sun itself, but also the kind of, you might say, the circuit of the sun during the hours of the night. So when you go through the underworld, then you go through the 12 hours of the night. And then when you come out in the east, you insert the Ankh, because you're given the Ankh by Thoth, because you've become, as it were, Thoth. You're deified as Thoth at the end of the initiation, and or you're identified with Ra, because Ra, being the circle of the sun, is also the One. It's a form of the One. It's more of a symbolic representation of the One, whereas Thoth, the One, would be more of an archetypal representation. So you insert the key in the lock in the east, and you open it, and then the sun, the circle, rises to the surface of the earth. So therefore you have the figure of the Ankh. So when as it were, the sun, the black sun goes below the surface of the earth, and then it rises and goes above the surface of the earth as the golden sun. If we move to the four Gospels of the New Testament, we see Jesus being judged by Pontius Pilate. Then he's handed over to the Roman soldiers, because the Jewish people would rather that he die than the criminal Barabbas. So Barabbas is a terrible criminal, but they would prefer to kill Jesus than Barabbas, because Pontius Pilate said, you can choose between these two, which one you want to set free and which one you want to put to death. So he hands them over to the soldiers, who really beat him, and they he put on a scarlet robe, which symbolises sacrifice and redemption. But it also says that they put on a purple robe. So you have the sacrificial sun hero descending in the west, and that represents sacrifice and redemption. And then when he comes out in the east, he's the king. So on the cross, it actually engraved the idea that Jesus is King of the Jews. So that's the purple robe, which the kings and the emperors and the high priests wore in the ancient Middle East. So Jesus is taken and he's nailed to the cross. So we're having the form of the Ankh, so the cross. And now when his head droops, when he dies, his head droops below the horizontal bar, as it were. And when he resurrects and puts on the purple robe, his head goes above the bar, which would signify the Ankh. So you could say the Ankh is inverted, the Ankh is put upright. And it actually says in Revelations that Jesus' face shone as the sun. Again, that's the sun, the head is the sun. And that he holds the keys to death and to Hades. Well, that's the Ankh. The key of life is the key in the west and the key in the east. And they're the keys of Hades, or the underworld. Another way of looking at it is the idea of the Freemasons' compass and square. So you've got the compass makes the circle and the square makes the square, obviously. And the Freemasons celebrated Thoth as the grand architect of the universe. So with his compass, he would make the spheres of the celestial spheres, which are the stars and the suns and the planets. And then he would design the square as representing the earth, the four cardinal points. So you have the idea of the master mason, the architect as it were, and then the mason. So you have the master mason and the mason. And of course Imhotep was the architect of the step pyramid, and he had the masons that would build the step pyramid. You can also see it as a mandala, where you have the mandala is a square, and in the centre you have a circle. So you have the four cubic thrones in the four cardinal points, and you have the central lion throne, which represents the sun. So Horus is given when Horus rises in the east, he's given the golden cubic throne by his grandfather, the earth god. So he's the solar lion king. So when Buddha became Buddha, he would be seated as the root guru on the lion throne with a golden halo, which would be the same thing as the sun. And of course it just represents the body anyway. If you stretch out your arms horizontally and stand straight, then that would be the Ankh as well, which would represent the step pyramid. And in the Grail Legend, when Parsifal's going to go into the Grail castle in the land of the dead, which is a form of the underworld, because the step pyramid complex, which is surrounded by a white wall, represents the underworld. It's actually called the underworld. It's also called the Castle of Eternity and the Tower. And when he's in the land of the dead, he's given a scarlet robe, which represents sacrifice and redemption, because he's going to redeem and cure the Fisher King. Because when the king, for example, in Egypt, if the king's ill and sick, then the land is sick, because the power of the king is necessary to keep the land fertile, because Osiris is the Nile god, and the black silt, the black soil of the inundation or the flood waters, that's what fertilizes the land of Egypt. So if the king is sick, he's ill, like when Set kills him and puts him in a black box in the Acacia Ark and throws it into the river, then because Set is the god of sterility and the god of the desert, and he's the evil black pig, and he's also the goat and the unicorn, which is a sacrificial beast, then the land is infertile. And so Horus descends into the underworld, into the Castle of Eternity, to actually cure his father by avenging his death. That is, by overcoming Set. So the good nature of Horus, you might say, overcomes the evil tendency of Set. But they're all one family. I mean, they're all in the Ennead, so they're all one family. And so he's brought about an integration, a balance between good and evil, the knowledge of good and evil. And in that kind of harmony, then the Osiris, who's in the black box or the black cube or the acacia ark or the mummy chamber, being the corn god, then the green shoots shoot up and grow out of the ark and put on the golden sheaves. So he's the vegetation god that dies into the earth, sows the seed, and then is germinated and grows up as the resurrection god. And more or less that's the role of Jesus as well, in a very similar situation. So Parsifal goes into the land of the dead, he puts on the scarlet robe, he goes into the Grail castle, and his ancestor, the Fisher King, because Osiris is lord of the ancestral cars or spirits or souls, so it's all about ancestor worship. So the Fisher King is lying on a couch. He's wounded. He's called Amphortus. He's got a wound, but that wound is a mystery. It's not really said what that wound is. They say that an invisible entity wounded him. And this idea of the invisible entity, you might say a kind of unearthly entity, wounds him. And it wounds him in the thigh. And that represents the sexual area, so that makes him infertile. And that's exactly what happened with Osiris. He became infertile. So he's lying on the couch, he's wearing the black skull cap, which is a symbol of the black sun, and that's what Pa, the god of the step pyramid, he wears the black skull cap, because he's the black sun. Pa, Sekher, Osiris. Pa is the god of the step pyramid. Sekher is the primitive, most primitive funerary god of the Egyptians, and Asar, Osiris, is the black sun. So they're the funerary god, the black sun, and they're wearing the black skull cap, and also the Fisher King wears the black skull cap. And on the black skull cap, the Fisher King wears a ruby or a garnet, and the garnet really is the carbuncle, which is the third eye, which is the sacrificial blood of the dragon. Because the root meaning of garnet, which is my own bloodstone, is my own family bloodstone, and it goes back through Jesus and Solomon and David right back to Horus. And the etymological root is Kermes. And Kermes is a form of insect. It's actually a worm, and you extract a scarlet dye. So you have the idea of the worm and the dragon, the scarlet dragon. And of course the scarlet dragon is a reptile, and reptile or lizards have a third eye. They used to have a third eye. It's atrophied, but they did have a third eye. And that's where the idea of the third eye and the dragon comes from, or the serpent or the lizard or the reptile. So Osiris is from Draco, the dragon. Isis is a red serpent, the Kundalini is a red serpent, etc. So that's the third eye, the carbuncle, and it's at the base of the horn of the unicorn. Now that means that, in a sense, the third eye, the carbuncle on the skull cap, is given to Parsifal. This is the idea that it's actually given to Parsifal, and with that he can have a vision of the Grail. Now, if you take the black sun, when it sinks to the south into into the area of the mummy chamber, then that's where the lake of fire is. So the idea that inside the black sun, because it's going to be reborn, it will rise as the golden sun in the east. So we have the black sun in the west, the golden sun in the east, and the red sun in the middle, as it were. So that means in the black sun there's a spark of life. There's a red ember. There's a red coal. Now, the garnet is the scarlet worm, and there are 5 types. One of them is pyrope, which means fiery eye, so we have the third eye idea. And then one of them is the carbuncle. The Latin carbuncle means coal or carbon, and carbon is necessary for all organic life. So everything alive on this planet, the vegetation, everything, depends on carbon. And in fact, I heard that in the University of Birmingham in England, at the present time, they're studying the crystal as an interface between inorganic matter and living organic matter. So they're actually studying the crystal as the life force. That's what they're actually doing at the moment. So it's very interesting, because the ancient Egyptians certainly knew that. And I think the Buddhists did with the diamond body as well. So inside the black sun, which would be, you could say, a piece of coal, it could be the ash, the black ash, which contains the red ember, which is the garnet crystal, the carbuncle. And when the phoenix rises out of the black ash, she rises as the serpent dragon. So we have the Kermes worm, the scarlet dragon, and she then rises up, and in effect, you could say she becomes the eagle of the north. So you could say the serpent of the south, because where the black sun is in the south, that is veritably a snake pit. That would be actually a kind of snake pit, because there's lots of images of snakes there. So you've got the snake in the hole in the ground, and the eagle on top of the mountain, as it were, which is the pyramid. So the eagle sits in the sunbow as the phoenix, but in fact the actual image of the phoenix in the sunbow is a grey heron. But mythologically speaking, you could say that, as I say, the dragon is in the ground, as it were, just as Typhon is at the base of the volcanic island, the dragon Typhon, which is a form of Set, and Set is known as the Red One. And when Horus overcomes Set, he's called Red Cloaked. And when Parsifal overcomes the Red Knight, he puts on the red armour. So he's also the Red One, as it were. And of course Jesus on the cross, wearing the scarlet robe, as it were, he overcomes Satan. He goes down into the pit and overcomes Satan. And in Revelations it said that he casts the scarlet dragon into the pit. Now it's interesting because if you think of Draco as the scarlet dragon, for example, or just the dragon, then the starry heavens is known as the watery abyss. So in a sense, you could say that Draco's in the abyss. So when Horus replaces his father Osiris, because he becomes the king, and in effect Osiris is the dead king and Horus is the living king. Well, Horus is associated with Ursa Minor, the little bear, the constellation Little Bear. She overcomes Set, who's the great bear, and the great bear is the closest constellation to Draco in the ancient world, where the pole star is. And what happened in the mythology is that Set kills Osiris because he wants to become king, and he thinks he's entitled because he's the brother. But the court of the gods in Heliopolis decide in favour of Horus. So that means to say that Set, in a sense, removes Draco, Osiris, poisons Horus, trying to take over, trying to get rid of the, you could say, the little bear, who would inherit the Draco, as it were, the pole star. And but Horus overcomes the great bear. Now, in the ancient world, from about 4000 BC to about 1000 BC, that was the pole star in Draco. Then in the archaic period of Greece, around 1700 BC, the pole star moved into Ursa Minor, the little bear. So we can see almost that the Egyptians, through the myth of Osiris, Set and Horus, were looking ahead to the time when Horus, as the little bear, would become the new pole star. And I think that myth is about that. And now what's interesting is that the little bear in Greek mythology is known as Arcus. And Arcus is the ancestor of the Arcadians. And the main god of Arcadia is Hermes. And of course Hermes is Thoth. And the Greeks called the city of Kemenu in Middle Egypt, which is the city of Thoth, they called it Hermopolis. And that was one of 7 cities in Middle Egypt. Heptonomus, it's called Heptonomus, because each district is called a nome. So you have the 7 Heptonomus. And in fact, the Greeks actually called that area Arcadia. And then we have this prediction, I'm saying, of the pole star moving into the little bear, and the Greeks say that's Arcadia. So the Greek Ptolemaic kings of Egypt again adopted that mythology and put it in Arcadia. And so you could say the Hermetic tradition of Thoth, Hermes Trismegistus, or thrice great Thoth, of the step pyramid, or Hermopolis, moves over to Arcadia, and that's actually what happened. The Hermetic arc goes to Arcadia, then there's a subterranean stream that goes from Arcadia in archaic Greece into Italy, and that becomes Renaissance Italy, where the occult tradition, the Hermetic tradition, was rediscovered. And that leads on to Germany and the Rosicrucians, and England and France, the Freemasons. So the whole tradition works that way, as a kind of underground stream. So Parsifal's with his ancestor, and he's lying on the couch before a blazing fire, and the fire is enclosed by 4 pillars. So again you have the idea of a square, and the hall itself is a square. And it also says that the tower of the castle, the Grail Castle, it is likened to a castle tower in Berytus, which is the ancient term for Beirut, in what today we call Lebanon, but it was Phoenicia. So we're talking about Berytus in Phoenicia, and that was actually built by Saturn. And Saturn is the god El, which is the chief god of the Phoenicians. Now El Shaddai is the Lord God of the Bible, of the Jewish religion. So the Jewish religion actually, in one sense, worships Saturn. Now it's interesting that Noah had 3 sons that survived the flood. And of course Noah was put in an ark, and so was Osiris put in an ark. And Moses' Ark of the Covenant, the Acacia Ark, is the very ark that Osiris was put inside by Seth. Now, the 3 sons are Shem, Canaan, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And Shem was after the flood, was given the lands of Babylon and Arabia. Ham was given Egypt and Phoenicia, and Japheth was given the Mediterranean islands and Europe. And Ham really means brown or black, so he's actually the black lands of Egypt. So it says that Abraham and Melchizedek worship El Shaddai, which would be Saturn, and the son of Ham is Canaan, and Canaan established Phoenicia as the Canaanites, and then the Canaanites spread into the area of Palestine and became the land of Canaan, and that's where Jerusalem is. So when Moses goes into the Sinai desert and works his way to Jerusalem, that's the land of Canaan. So they actually worship El and his son Baal, and Baal is Set. So the hall, I liken the hall of the Grail Castle, which was built by Saturn, as it were, to the black cube. So the Fisher King is in the black cube before the fire, which is the ember, the carbuncle in his black skull cap. That symbolises the fire, the ember, out of which the phoenix will rise. And then you've got the black cube as the tomb of Osiris. So the Fisher King and Parsifal, they go and sit at a table and have a feast. And the table is described as either an emerald table, which is the emerald table, the Tabula Smaragdina of Hermes Trismegistus, or Thrice Great Thoth, and on it are inscribed the 13 principles of the art. So that makes the table 14, and the 14 is sacred to Osiris. So the table itself would be 14 sacred to Osiris. The 13 would represent the 12 signs of the zodiac and the sun. So we're seeing the 12 signs of the zodiac that rotate around Draco, the dragon, the seat of Osiris. And then we have the white wall encircling the step pyramid, which is the castle of eternity. And in the white wall of the step pyramid complex, there are 14 doors. 13 of those doors are dummy doors, they're false doors, and only one is the true door. Jesus says in the Bible, I am the door. He says, I am the door, the true door, and through the door come my followers. So the only way into the step pyramid complex, into the underworld, is the 14th door, which is the door of Osiris, because that's his house. It's the door into the house of Osiris, and he's the dweller in the house. He lives in the house. So again, the Fisher King in the castle, and Osiris is the fish god of the Nile River. He's the god of the Nile, he's the fish god. And Draco, the dragon, you could say is a form of fish in the Milky Way, which is the Nile River. They're seated at the emerald table, or it's actually described as the garnet. So it's a garnet crystal table, a red crystal table. And they're eating pomegranates, and the Latin granatum means pomegranate because means pomegranate, and that's the root meaning of garnet, because the crystals of the garnet look like the seeds of the pomegranate. So they're seated at a garnet table and they're eating the pomegranate, which symbolizes death, transformation and rebirth. And the Grail bearer, bearing a vessel of gold, which symbolizes the Grail, she comes in and puts the Grail, the golden vessel, in the middle of the emerald table or the middle of the garnet table. The emerald table, the green table, would represent the green-skinned Osiris, who's the vegetation god, the green skin of Osiris. So you can say that the black cube represents the earth. When the seed is fired, when the ember fires the seed, as it were, the sun seed or the seed of the golden corn, the green shoots come out of the earth. Now, when the sun rises to the zenith, at the apex of the step pyramid, that means the centre of the sky, as it were, the kind of middle of the sky, the navel of Nut. So it's in the zenith above the earth. When it shines down on the black cube or the black earth from winter, and the seeds have been germinated, then they sprout, and that forms the green foliage, and that becomes the surface of the earth. So you could say that's the emerald table. And that is the green-skinned vegetation god, Osiris, that was the black one, the black earth, and now he's the golden corn. So the golden vessel of the sun is put in the centre of the green emerald table, and that's the green earth. And then Parsival actually has a vision of the Grail, and there's not much description of what that's like. It takes the form of a light anyway, you know, a kind of light that doesn't seem to have any source. It's just a bright light in the actual castle. So it's a kind of illumination, as it were. So Abraham and Melchizedek worship El Shaddai, and that's Saturn. I mean, Jung says that Saturn was worshipped by the Jews, and Saturn is the black sun or the black star, which again identifies him as the chief god, and Ham was given the lands of Egypt and Phoenicia, and the Egyptians did colonize Phoenicia, and Osiris was actually worshipped in Byblos. And now Byblos was the city that Saturn was supposed to build, or Barytus or Beirut, but you can say Byblos. So the tower of the Grail kingdom and the Grail castle was built by Saturn, and it was compared to a tower of the same kind in Phoenicia in Byblos or Barytus, and that's where Osiris was actually worshipped. And of course Osiris, his brother, is Set, and the son of El is Baal, and his effigy is the black stone. It says in the New Testament that Jesus is a high priest of the order of Melchizedek. And that Melchizedek only appears for a few verses in the New Testament, and literally for a couple of verses, only a few lines in the Old Testament, and yet he plays a very important part. And he's the king of righteousness and the king of Salem, and Salem is actually Jerusalem. So it's saying that the king, that when Abraham divined in the stars, consulted the stars, looked into the stars, the Lord God, meaning Saturn, the Lord God said, the stars are the seeds who will become kings of Canaan, i.e. David was the first king, and then his son Solomon the wise, and of course Jesus hypothetically is the king of Jerusalem. So Jesus is of the order of Melchizedek. And I mentioned in another program the idea of the 5 orders of Dhyani Buddhas in the visionary realm, that one of which is identified with Buddha. So he's of the 5 orders of the Dhyani, you might say. And then you get, in Egypt, you would say that the world order is Ma, and the cosmic order would be Thoth. Thoth is the lord of the law of Ma. So you could say that the order of Thoth, or the order of Hermes Trismegistus. So you get the Hermetic order of the Golden Dawn. at the Last Supper, Jesus said that the bread that they would eat would be his body, and the wine they would drink would be his blood. When Abraham met Melchizedek, it was said that Melchizedek of Salem, Jerusalem, celebrated the Lord God with bread and wine. So it's coming from that. It's a sacrificial symbol of the crucifixion. And Osiris is actually the god of wine. And in the Greek mythology, or the Greek mystery schools of Eleusina, Hera, the wife of Zeus, Persephone, who's the maiden of the spring, who rose out of Hades and was given a pomegranate by Hades. Anyway, Hera, the wife of Zeus, Persephone and Bacchus were all celebrated with the pomegranate. So really the pomegranate again is the death, sacrifice and rebirth, or death, transformation and rebirth. So at the Last Supper, with the 12 disciples, so you could say the 12 signs of the zodiac, then Jesus would be the 13th, the sun, he would be the sun. Now the sun is, when it sinks into the ground, it's the black sun, symbolizing death. When it rises up, it's the golden sun. So there's death and resurrection, and in between is the scarlet colour of the carbuncle, the pomegranate, would be sacrifice and redemption. So in effect, Jesus dies on the cross and becomes Christ, with Christ consciousness, which would be the solar lion king, the illuminated golden head, or the halo of the Buddha with a third eye. And of course the blood would be the juice of the pomegranate and the wine, because in the ancient world they actually made wine out of pomegranates. And of course that's the scarlet worm, that's the blood of the dragon. And it says, doesn't it, that the serpent said, "You will not die, but be as gods, knowing good and evil. For the tree is to be desired to make you wise." So the poisonous blood, as it were, the poisoning of the blood by the serpent actually brings about death, transformation and rebirth, or sacrifice and redemption. So it's a kind of paradox. Knowledge of good and evil is actually a paradox. And of course the tree of life is the mystery that comes out of the paradox. And it says that one of the 12 was Judas, who betrays Jesus to the Romans, and he's actually belongs to the tribe of Jesus, which is the Lion of Judah. That's the tribe of the Lion of Judah, and of course the solar Lion King is Horus. And so is Jesus, the solar lion king, whose face shines as the sun. And it's said at the Last Supper that Satan possessed Judas. So you could say when the serpent poisons you, you're possessed by the serpent, Satan. When you get black magic, you're possessed by Satan. You've got to deal with Satan, the beast 666. You've got to actually confront your shadow, as it were, or the dark aspects of the occult black art. because it's all of the symbols are a product of your own psyche. It's an internal drama. So the 12 signs of the zodiac that go around Draco. Draco is the sea, is the 14th. It's number 14 representing Osiris. You've got the 12 signs of the zodiac, and the 13th is the sun. And that's the transition between the black sun and the red sun. So you have you could say the 13th is both death and resurrection. Now, around the tabernacle, the tent, which Moses built as the portable house of God, he was told by the Lord God on Mount Sinai to design the tabernacle as the house of God, as it were, which later becomes the Temple of Solomon. And it has the tent is pointed and has a square base, so that's the pyramid, the step pyramid. It's pointed in the sense, or truncated, but has the top is the triangle and the lower is a square. And in the centre is the gold-plated cube, which again is the golden throne that Horus is given when the sun illuminates the black cube, as it were, in the east. Now, the 12 tribes, the 12 sons of Jacob, are the 12 tribes of Israel, and they have their own tents around the main tent. So there are 3 on each side, and they actually do represent the zodiac. And on the breastplate of the high priest Aaron, the brother of Moses, and Moses is a form of king because he was a prince in Egypt, and he's not formally recognized as a king. He's a substitute king because it refers to the princes of the tribes, of the various tribes have princes. And so, in a sense, Moses is the king. And there is the idea that he was King Akhenaten. There is the idea that he was King Akhenaten. And anyway, so the 12 around, the 12 signs of the zodiac around the tent. And so Aaron, the high priest, would represent, he sprinkles the blood of a sacrificial bull over the Ark of the Covenant, the Acacia Ark. Well, Osiris is the dead Apis bull, so he would be within the Acacia Ark, and also the symbol of Osiris as the king. He would have the shepherd's crook, and the crook is actually inside the Acacia Ark. So Moses, coming from Egypt, he brought all the, you might say, symbols from Egypt and put them all into the tabernacle. So you have the Acacia Ark is the Ark of the Covenant, Osiris's crook is in the Ark of the Covenant, and so if Moses is the king and he represents Osiris, then Aaron would represent Horus, who in a sense sprinkles the sacrificial blood over in the Holy of Holies. So again, you have the 12, 13, 14, and of course the tabernacle itself could be 14, which is the house of Osiris. Now, it's interesting that when Akhenaten set up his own religion in Middle Egypt, in Amarna, he took the idea of the solar deity of Heliopolis, that his father worshipped, and he made that solar worship into a god called Aten, A-T-E-N. So you have Akhenaten, and who was the incarnation of the atom. He got rid of all of the associations to the sun god, all of the symbols of the sun god, like Ra, the hawk of Ra, the falcon of Horus, all of the symbols, and the only one he kept was the crook. So if Akhenaten is Moses, and Moses puts the crook in the acacia ark, the only thing, there's the crook in the acacia ark, there's the golden pot of manna, the bread from heaven, and the 2 tablets of stone. So the most important thing, if Moses is Osiris in Draco, and Osiris is holding the crook, which symbolises the Good Shepherd, and actually Moses, when he was living in the Sinai, after he left Egypt, he was a shepherd. That symbolises the crook. Now the Lord God said to Moses, cast your crook onto the ground. He throws the crook onto the ground and it turns into a serpent. He picks up the serpent by the tail and it turns into a crook. In Egypt, the high priest or the magician, the most important magical instrument in ancient Egypt, was the serpent wand. So again, you've got the serpent wand, you've got the crook, and they're all symbolic of Osiris and the magician, etc. in Egypt. And that's put in the acacia ark. The acacia ark is the ark of the covenant. It's the ark of Osiris, where he's put in there as the dead corn god, and he grows out of the ark as the resurrected God. Aaron, the high priest, is dressed in the colours of purple and scarlet, which Jesus wore, right? Purple and scarlet, and Horus and his father. His father is actually described in certain parts as the mummy that's enfolded in a red cloth, which is given to him by Isis, the red serpent. So it identifies the scarlet colour of the dragon. And he's also described as wearing purple. So Aaron, the high priest, wears a breastplate. And on the breastplate are 4 rows of crystals, and they represent the 12 tribes of the Israelites, and they represent the crystals of the zodiac. So each of the star systems of the zodiac, as it were, is represented by a crystal, and one of those crystals is the carbuncle and the emerald. So the emerald and the carbuncle are 2 of the crystals of the tribe, and the emerald belongs to the Levites, and the Levites are the high priests, and the house and the family of Moses and his brother Aaron, and the Levites, they're the ones that look after all of the sacred ornaments and the tabernacle itself. They're the only ones who are allowed to touch the Ark of the Covenant and look after the tabernacle. So that they're the priestly caste, you might say. And of course, the carbuncle becomes the associated with the Lion of Judah, and with the kings David, Solomon, and Jesus, as it were, and that's discussed quite well in the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail. The whole lineage of the bloodline of the Holy Grail. So I think that's a good place to stop.